Welcome to another episode of The Cynical Writer. Before we get started, I would just like to remind everyone that if you would like to support this channel, the best way to do that is to purchase my books. And I've left a link in the description section. And my most recent book is titled The Ecstasy and the Ignominy, which is essentially a literary historical novel, somewhat similar to A Tale of Two Cities and Anna Karenina, with also a little bit of crime and punishment as well. Now, today's topic is, why do authors get depressed, or why are so many authors depressed? Now, of course, I am not an expert in this area. I am not a doctor. I am speaking primarily from my own experience. And so you shouldn't take what I say with any level of authority. It's just my own experience and observation. And now I want to say on the outfront that I do think there is a difference between clinical depression and feeling depressed or being in a depressing situation. Because for the longest time, I actually thought that I was clinically depressed. But now that I look back, I'm not actually so certain that I was clinically depressed or that I am clinically depressed, because most of my depression is related very much to situational issues, um, feelings of loneliness or feelings of not being successful. But those are things that are very situational. Um, they're not, to me, someone is clinically depressed if they, for example, have a really good life, but yet they still feel like a deep amount of despair, even though they have no logical reason to. Um, I think in many cases, people think they're depressed, but in reality, they may just have a terrible life, and that there's a difference there. Because if a writer, for example, is poor, if they're lonely, if they're not very successful, then of course they're going to feel depressed. It's perfectly logical to feel depressed in a situation like that. Clinical depression to me is when someone feels really depressed, even though there's no logical reason for them to feel depressed. Um, it's one of those things where I actually think that if you want to know whether you're clinically depressed, in my own personal opinion, first try to fix all the problems you have in your life. And then if you still feel depressed, then there may be something deeper going on, but you'll never figure that out if you don't first deal with those problems. Um, but I think we place too much of an emphasis in our culture on self-help. I think that's one of the main problems, because it's easier to go to a doctor and tell someone just take a pill, but to me, that often doesn't get to the heart of the issue, because there are many problems that we can't solve on our own. For example, as writers, we can't, help if people buy our books or not. That's a problem that we cannot solve on our own. We need other people to help us, to support us. The same thing when people feel lonely. That's not a problem that is inherently clinical. I mean, it may be if someone has a lot of good friends and they still feel lonely, maybe then. But I would say that in many cases, that if someone feels lonely, it's because they're not actually getting adequate support. And that's why they feel lonely. It's not for any clinical reason, but that would require society and other people to come and step in and help you. And that's something that people don't want to do. That instead they want to put it all on the individual. Um, it's a similar thing that I think with um, autism, for example. And I know I may get some heat over this, but I actually don't like the label autism, because, and there have been people who have suspected that I may have it at times. I've never been officially diagnosed with it or anything, but to me, it's like I wouldn't want to be necessarily, not because I think there's anything wrong with being diagnosed with it, or that there's a stigma, but because to me, it's like I don't like this idea of trying to label other people as simply because they're different, simply because they may have a different way of doing things, simply because they may value introversion and they may want to speak about deeper subjects and not small talk and other kinds of things. Just because someone is socially quirky and doesn't like small talk, that doesn't mean they have some kind of disorder. Why isn't society the one with the disorder? Why isn't it society that is the one that is disordered, that it doesn't function right, that that because to me it's like, okay, that they say like the person who can't engage in small talk that they're disordered, but why isn't the person who can't engage on subjects on a deeper level, why aren't they the disordered one? And to me, we could this could go two different ways. I think that so much of diagnosis is based on societal prejudices that people have. And yes, I'm aware that there are extreme cases where you have people who cannot function properly in terms of like they scream and yell and do things, and I understand that, but I especially think when it comes to the high functioning autism crowd, so to speak, that labeling such people with a disorder is quite dangerous. And to me, I just think we need to respect each other's differences and not label people. Now that I am not saying this is not I am not saying that that well, autism isn't real, just toughen up, boy. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying is that yes, people are different. Yes, people need help in some cases, but we need to respect those differences without resorting to a label. And yes, I understand that people need accommodations at times, but to me, I think it's a pretty sad state in society when you have a situation where people in order to get help, you need to have a label or a diagnosis instead of people just being understanding. And now I do think that some people they cling to such labels because that they view it as a part of their identity. But I do think that actually helps reinforce the bigotry and stigma that they claim to be against. I actually don't think it helps in the long run. Um, but anyway, nah, I know I got sidetracked there with autism, but why do writers feel depressed? And I'm talking about a wide range of different kinds of depression here, um, whether it's situational or clinical. And when it comes to and so I'm not just talking about one kind. Now I do not think it is a good idea to romanticize depression and any way, or say that a writer needs to be depressed to be creative, because to me it's like depression is something that is it erodes your soul, so to speak. It's not the kind of thing that helps creativity. Yes, it can help creativity if you have experienced sadness or troubles in your life, but if you are in a state of deep depression, that is going to make things worse. It's not going to help your creativity. And of course, various writers throughout history have been depressed. You have people like Ernest Hemingway and David Foster Wallace, and who obviously in those cases took their own life. And of course, I can't get into the psychology of such people to tell you why they did it or anything like this. Only they know why. I can only say for myself, for example, that I am far too curious, intellectually curious about life to ever go down that route. That's one of the reasons why some people say, "Oh, they couldn't live forever." I think I probably could as long as I had my health and my mental faculties, especially. If I didn't, that would be a different thing. But as long as I had that, I think that I could go on. Because because I'm intellectually curious about society, about literature, about various kinds of things. That if I had more time, that would just I could write more books and read more. And so even if I experience major loss in living forever, which I would, and I would feel very depressed over it at times, but I think I could go on as long as I had that intellectual curiosity. And but it does seem to me though that one of the reasons why writers feel depressed is because writing takes a lot of energy out of you, and you have to live through your characters, so to speak. You have to share their sorrows and their pain, and that can often and that sorrow and that pain is often a representation of the pain that is within us. Our characters are instruments, so to speak, for our own pain, and that exercise in releasing that pain on the page, it can be cathartic, but it can also, in some cases, um, damage a writer because it puts them in a situation where they feel emotionally overwhelmed. So I think that's one of the reasons why a writer can feel depressed. And also, there's just this sense of when you are a creative person, you see things, and this could apply to artists and people of other creative persuasions. You see things differently than other people. You see through the hypocrisy. You live in a world where people do not value creativity, so you see through the hypocrisy. You see through um, the facades, the pretensions. Um, you see through the veil, so to speak. You see that society is largely anti-intellectual because when people are anti-intellectual, that makes them much more difficult. That makes them you can control them much more easily. It makes them much more. It's much more easy to control people if they are not intellectually curious. And so writers see that in society, and when they see that, that can make them feel very depressed because they can see things in a way that other people cannot see them, and because they feel so alone, because they feel so isolated, that can lead to depression. Because when you see beauty in the world, but other people mostly see ugliness, when they only see the hideous side of nature and life, that can feel very isolating because you feel like humanity and society as a whole is eroding beneath you, and that if it continues to erode, that you will be left with nothing beneath you except a dark black emptiness. And that is very depressing. And that's how I feel at times because I'm such a creative person. I see things in a way that other people simply do not. I see the hypocrisy. I see the veil that society has, where people are so distracted with superficial things that they never probe deeply. They never probe deeply into the soul. I've actually thought about this recently because when I was, for example, some of you know I recently got back from a trip to Universal, and when I went to Universal, I had a good time, and it was an uplifting place overall. But I noticed one of the things that made me kind of depressed was that I saw people walking beside each other, large crowds, but yet no one really knows one another. I'm just another invisible face in the crowd, and the workers are kind and polite, but they don't know you. You're just a customer to them, and it makes it where you're together, but yet you're more isolated than ever because you're just another face in the crowd. That all these thousands of people are around you, and yet none of them care. They're essentially blinded by the consumerism that is around them. And yes, I know that theme parks are fun and all of that and uplifting, and I don't deny that there are positive aspects to it, but there's also this deep sense of isolation because people are so blind to the truth, because we are so disconnected from one another, because we don't really see, many people at least don't see beauty in the world. They just see blind consumerism, blind materialism, and this can make the artist feel very depressed because they feel alone in that observation. And so I think that is a major reason why writers feel depressed. And of course, I've talked about why society doesn't value writers in my last episode, how society ignores writers, doesn't value them monetarily, doesn't value beauty. And so I won't repeat that point, but I think writers feel deeply alone in that. And I also think that the expectation of wanting to always be better, of wanting to always create the next best thing, of wanting to outdo yourself, that could also make a writer feel depressed because a writer is constantly competing with himself. Um, And so that's another thing, is that perfectionism can lead to depression as well. And just the creative spirit of constantly thinking, of constantly imagining things, of constantly thinking, it can lead to feeling quite quite overwhelmed, quite because you have all these images in your head, and yet you cannot actually get rid of them. And so that can feel very isolating in itself, because you have all these mental images, and they're so overwhelming and you don't know what to do with it. And so that can also lead to depression as well. And so, for all of those reasons, I would say that the creative spirit is one that is very delicate and very sensitive. And because it requires a lot of mental power, you can often feel overwhelmed. So I think that's another reason why writers feel depressed, is that the artistic spirit is a delicate one, and quite often we live in a world that is brutal and does not understand that delicacy. So I hope you enjoyed my my video for today. And again, if you would like to support this channel, my books are linked in the description section. And until next time, goodbye.